In our study on the God that we worship, we're going to begin looking at the names of God. And I'd like to start by calling your attention to the very famous passage in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, where God appears to Moses in the burning bush. You've all heard that story and have read it, I'm sure. And God instructs Moses to go into Egypt to Pharaoh and to tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go. And I'll pick it up reading at verse 13, where we read, "And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come to the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. Now, the first thing that we notice, of course, in this text is something so obvious, so elementary, that it's easy for us to overlook. And that is the fact that God has a name. Remember when we looked at the situation in Athens where the inscription on the altar there was to an unknown God, a nameless God. And as I mentioned at that time, that unknown God of Athens was a God who was without form and void, and darkness was upon his face. Now keep in mind that you're living in a culture where people claim to be theists. Every now and then they run through these Gallup polls. A few years ago it said that 98% of the people in the United States believed in God. The latest poll showed a little bit of slippage there, that 95% believe in some kind of God and are therefore described as being theistic. They believe in God. But when we press people as to the nature of the God who is affirmed, we get very ambiguous statements like a supreme being, something greater than ourselves. What's that? You know, cosmic dust, nuclear power, or nuclear energy. But the polls don't ask the question specifically, how many of you believe in Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How many of you believe in the God who thunders from Sinai, Thou shalt have no other gods before me? How many of you believe in a God who demands absolute obedience and before whom we face an ultimate judgment, and our eternal destinies will be declared by his judgment, either eternity in heaven or in hell? How many people believe in a God like that? You see, a God without a name is safe. He has no content, no face to terrify us with. A God with no face can never frown at us. He can never manifest his displeasure or his anger or his seriousness and urgency of making commands. So what I'm saying is that in spite of the fact that the polls indicate that we are a theistic nation, it could also be said that in many ways we are practical atheists in this country. Because though we embrace an amorphous God, we tend to flee from the God who is named here in the sacred scriptures. Now, the fact that God has a name indicates biblically that he is personal. That's where the fear factor comes in. I mean, I'm not going to worry about a God who is a personality-less superior power. Because if there's some force up there of cosmic dust, what difference does that cosmic dust feel with respect to my obedience or disobedience. There is no personal relationship, no personal offense, no personal estrangement that I have to worry about. I might also say there's no personal redemption from an impersonal God. But Judaism and Christianity at the outset declare emphatically that the God who created heaven and earth is a person. And we are persons. And that's what makes it possible for us to be in a relationship to him. And I might add, a personal relationship to God is inescapable. Sometimes you'll hear Christians give their testimonies of being saved or being born again, and they will explain it by saying something like this: well, now I have a personal relationship with Christ, or now I have a personal relationship with God. You've heard that form of expression, and I think we understand what people are saying about that. But what is often overlooked in that discussion is what kind of a relationship did that person have before they were born again, or before they were converted to Christ. What is often overlooked is that we always have a personal relationship to God, because we are persons, and God is a person. And a relationship is established in creation between God and us. A relationship that is inescapable. I can deny the existence of God. All that does is put me in an estranged relationship to God, which is still a personal relationship. It is a personal relationship of hostility, a personal relationship of denial, a personal relationship of estrangement. But it is still a personal relationship. That is inescapable. There's nowhere that we can flee in this universe from our ultimate relationship to God. So the question is not whether there is a personal relationship, but what is the quality of that personal relationship? Is it a healthy one or an unhealthy one? A redeemed one or an estranged one? So God reveals himself as a God who is personal, a God who is a name, and a God who has a history of a relationship to us. Notice that when God reveals himself to Moses, he sets it in a historical context. I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. Abraham is not Isaac. Isaac is not Jacob. Jacob is not Abraham. Those are different persons, different individuals, but it is the same God who relates to each one of those persons. And again, that cuts at us our experience as Christians, our experience of worship on Sunday morning. When we come into church on Sunday morning, do we tend to bring with us only the New Testament and think of God as merely the Father of Jesus Christ? I hear people all the time in the context of church say to me, well, I believe in the God of the New Testament. It's the God of the Old Testament that I can't stomach. But do you find that disjunction between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament in the New Testament? Do you find it in the lips of Jesus? The one whom Jesus calls Father is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Joseph, the God of David, the God of Jeremiah, the God of Ezekiel, the God of Nehemiah, the God of Malachi, the God of John the Baptist, the God of Jesus, the God of Paul, the God of Peter. It's the same God who remains the same forever. And I think one of the reasons why we have a crisis in our worship and in the life of the church is the fact that we have been dreadfully negligent of mastering the history of God's revelation through the centuries that are contained within the Old Testament. I honestly don't know how we can ever understand Jesus if we don't first master the Old Testament. So we go back here now to understand God's character, God's self-revelation, understanding that he has a name, that he is personal, that he has a history. The New Testament occurs, what? In the fullness of time. In the Father's appointed time. It is the Father who sends the Son into the world. And it is the Son's mission to do all that the Father commissions him to do. It is his good pleasure to fulfill the mandate of the Father. Well, who is this Father? He is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Okay? Now, he reveals himself by a special name. And in this name, he says that, I remind you, this is my name forever. And it will be a memorial for all generations. So that the name of God that God gives to Moses is not for temporary use only, but it is to be the name that we know God by. Okay? Now, we all understand, I think, that names in the Bible have significance. That names are designed to say something about the one who bears the name. Isaac means laughter, because when Sarah heard the announcement that she was going to have a baby, she laughed. And so the child is named Isaac. Jacob means supplanter. His name is changed when his character undergoes transformation after he wrestles with God. And so the one who wrestles with God or strives with God means what? Israel. Jacob gets a new name as his character changes. But the name of God that remains and abides forever is the name Yahweh. Again, what does it mean? Let me just go over quickly some of the options of what it means. I'm thinking, for example, of Harvey Cox, who translates the name Yahweh, not I am who I am, but rather I will do what I will do. That is, he gives it an activistic interpretation. And what Harvey Cox is getting at is that God's name suggests a character that is described by action. And the action that God is most involved with is the action of liberation. The Exodus motif has been very, very central to 20th century theology, liberation theology, revolutionary theology that you hear so much about today. The idea being that the church is to be the avant-garde of God, like a floating crap game, moving always where the action is, agitating, generating, motivating change in social structures. And there certainly is an element of truth in there. Some take it to the extreme of seeing the church basically as an institution designed by God for political and economic revolution, pointing back to the Exodus and the God who is revealed there as the God who comes down to an oppressive Pharaoh, a tyrant, and demands liberation. And so it's built into his name, says Harvey Cox, I will do what I will do. I'm a God of action and a God of future action. Others look at it and say, no, it's not I will do what I will do, but I will be what I will be. Now, what school of thought would like that particular understanding of the name of God? Existentialists a little bit, but more what we call process theology, that sees God himself in a state of flux. God himself in a state of constant change, that God himself is evolving. He's part of this dynamic process of evolution of the cosmos. And so that God's character is not fixed. It's not static, but it's always in process, always changing. I will be what I will be. As if God is saying to Moses, don't worry about what I am, because what I am changes. And that has provoked no small amount of controversy. Others see in God's answer to Moses, by what whose name should I give to the people of Israel, actually a denial by God to give a name. Why do you suppose that would be? There's a strange dimension in biblical history focusing on names. Who names John the Baptist?
God.
God does. Who normally names children? The parents name the children. Always the parents name the children, except in very special circumstance where God anoints a child for a special task, and God comes in and exercises his ultimate authority, his divine prerogative, and keeps for himself the right to name the child. And when does John the Baptist get his ability to speak back? I don't mean John the Baptist, Zacharias, who is stricken dumb when he trembles in unbelief before the angel, Gabriel. Yes, after the child is born and the prophecy is fulfilled and the relatives gather around, they're saying, well, what are we going to name this boy? And we don't know all the ins and outs, but I presume some of them are saying Zacharias Jr., or let's name him after grandfather Hezekiah, whoever. And Zacharias goes and gets a blackboard and writes, his name shall be called John. And at that moment, he is submitting to the divine authority to render the name. And then his power of speech is recovered. Who names Jesus? Again, God the Father names Jesus. So we see this concept of authority in the right to name. Now we see another strange episode in the Old Testament when Jacob wrestles with the angel. What are they fighting about? When does the battle end? Tell me your name! Jacob cries to the angel. Will the angel give him his name? No, because it's like if the angel gives him his name, it's like the angel was saying, Uncle, I surrender. So that to reveal the name is to be an act of submission. We see it in demon exorcism, where Jesus demands that the demons tell him their name. And when they do that, they are acknowledging Jesus' authority over them. So, because of all of this intricate use of names, some have speculated that what really God is saying here, and when Moses says, who shall I say sent me? What's your name? God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is saying, I am who I am. It's none of your business what my name is, and forevermore, I am going to remain nameless, because I will not submit to your arrogant probings. Now, some have taken that position. I personally don't think that'll stand up in light of how the name is used and what God says about it. God himself says, this is my name. It is my name that is to be memorialized, and it is a meaningful name, and so on. But the classic understanding and the classic translation of this, I personally think is the correct one. I am who I am. Okay? What's that for a name? What does it mean? I am who I am. Now, there's another debate. There are many debates, and in the rush of time, I can't go over all of the details. I don't think that God is directly and specifically communicating a particular attribute here, but it is certainly closely related to one that's very important. It's called the attribute of self-existence, or sometimes called aseity. And this calls attention to perhaps the most fundamental difference between God and man, and indeed all other creatures. That God alone is self-existent. Now that is a philosophical concept, or a theological concept, but it's one we must understand. And it's one that gives us a foundation for worshiping and adoring God when we come together in church. We're finite creatures. We're very fragile. We've talked about this in many other courses here, that if I go over to Wayne here and I choke him by the neck and shut off his oxygen supply, he's not going to live very long. I talked to a man just day before yesterday who was a combat pilot in World War II. And he talked about how many pilots were lost because their oxygen supply went off when they were above 15,000 feet, and within 30 seconds they blacked out and went into spins and crashed and died. And that man said to me, R.C., you'd be amazed how vulnerable a person is to the loss of oxygen. We're fragile. Take away your food, take away your water, take away all those things that we need to live for very long, and we simply die. But God doesn't need oxygen, and God doesn't need food, and God doesn't need water, because God is not dependent. He exists in and of himself. He has the one power that no human being and no creature has ever been able to have in and of himself. And I am going to get philosophical here for a second, but I want you to think on this, that what God has that none of us has is the power of being. It's a funny thing that everybody, goes into philosophical debates forever arguing over whether there is proof for the existence of God. And I said in a discussion earlier, one molecule on this earth is all it takes to prove the existence of God. Because if something is rather than is not, then somehow, somewhere, in order to account for the tiniest speck of dust, we have to find something that has the power of being. Because if nothing had the power of being, what would be? Nothing. It's that simple. If anything is, somewhere, somehow, in this universe, something or someone must have the power of being within himself. It's the simplest argument for the existence of God you can give, and I might add, the most cogent and the most powerful, and no philosopher has ever gainsaid that argument without ending in nonsense, without ending ultimately into some kind of theory that says once there was nothing and poof, there was something. But something out of nothing is as repugnant to theology as it is to science, because it's utterly irrational. If something is, something must have the power of being. Aristotle understood that, Plato understood that, Augustine understood it, St. Thomas Aquinas understood it, Luther understood it, Calvin understood it, Edwards understood it, I understand it, and I think you do. And so all the sophisticated arguments to the contrary, you can't get away from the fact of accounting somehow for the power of being. And what Christianity is saying is, folks, God comes in the Midianite wilderness, and Moses says, who is sending me to this most powerful being in the earth? Pharaoh, the one who has the power to move mountains with chariots and destroy and enslave the whole Jewish nation. Who am I, Moses says, to go up against that man? With all of his power, God says, I am. That is, the one who has the power of being itself. The only one who can bring something out of nothing. The only one who can bring life out of death. That's the one who's sending you on this mission. So what are you worried about Pharaoh for? Pharaoh can't live, a minute and a half without any oxygen. I can live eternity without any oxygen. You're worried about Pharaoh? So we're talking, when we go to worship God, we worship the one to whom we owe life itself. What does Paul say when he debates the philosophers and their unknown God? He says, I see with your unknown God, you're too superstitious. But I declare to you, the one in whom we live and move what?
We have our being.
And have our being. Live? The greatest secret, the greatest mystery to modern science is still life. Life. Talk about test tube babies. There are no test tube babies. There's in vitro fertilization and extrauterine fertilization. But nobody made a baby in a test tube. Nobody has created life from nothing. Doesn't take a genius to add amino acids to amino acids and come up with some kind of compound. But I want to see the scientist in the 24th century who can go in that laboratory with nothing and come out with life. Okay? That's what I want to see. It's the God in whom we live and the God in whom we move. The second greatest problem to modern science is motion. It was the greatest problem to ancient science. It's still a greatest problem. Nobody understands motion yet. And the greatest philosophical problem of all is being. And don't you see what Paul is saying is that the greatest issues of life are resolved in a person who alone has the power to account for life, for emotion, and for being. Contrast to that, the Song of Popeye, if you saw the movie a few years ago, Popeye, I think, expressed most graphically the whole modern dilemma. When somebody asked Popeye who he was, you know what he said? I am what I am, what I am, what I am. Popeye, the sailor man, I am. Who was he? An orphan searching for his father. Someone who knew what he was, but not how he was, or where he came from, but desperately seeking his roots like Alex Haley, to find out the basis and the foundation for the very power of being that he experiences in life. We go no further than Yahweh. I am who I am.
Everything I used to live for faded slowly out of sight. Now my days just circle around you like I'm lost without a light.
All the noise just turns to silence when your memory comes through. And the world I once was chasing now feels small and shaped like you. My whole world is only you. Every thought keeps breaking through. You're so close inside my mind, but so far in real life.
I can feel you everywhere, in the things we never shared. All this love I'm going through
never reaches you. Every image feels so real now, like you're standing next to me. But the truth is in the silence, you were never meant to see. My whole world is only you. Every thought keeps breaking through. You're so close inside my mind, but so far in real life. I can feel you everywhere, in the things we never shared. All this love I'm going through never reaches you. If you felt it for a moment, would it change the way you stay?
Or would I still be the shadow that just fades away?